This is Erik Daly speaking from Miller Johnson. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Wang, who joined the firm a couple months ago and works with me in the corporate and M&A group and was very helpful in working through the background of today's presentation and putting together some of the slides we'll go through. And the focus of today's presentation is a new program we have here in Michigan beginning tomorrow that will open up called the Afflicted Business Relief Program, although it appears to have been rebranded as the Growing Michigan Business Program. And we'll talk through some of the information that will be relevant to potential applicants for that program today. And by way of agenda, we'll just give a little background on this program and sort of its origination, what types of businesses are eligible to participate, what you need to know about the application process and timeline. Wei will then talk through the award calculation methodology and I think at least one example. And briefly, we'll touch on use of funds and a few concluding thoughts. We'll also have some Q&A in there, time permitting. So with that, we'll get started. The background on the Growing My Business / ABR program is kind of rooted in the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. It's the acronym we'll use in the presentation today. As I mentioned, this program was originally referred to as the Afflicted Business Relief Program. That is the terminology that's used in the statute by the Michigan legislature that passed this program into law in December 2021, and it was authorized and funded with $409 million of ARPA appropriations, and it will be administered by the Michigan Department of Treasury. Many of the program's key features are just defined by the statute that created the program, which is really only 4 or 5 pages long, the actual statute. And so the impact of that is that Michigan Treasury has somewhat limited discretion in how it implements the program. Obviously, it can't exceed or stray too far off the path that's set out by the legislature and the governor who signed the legislation into law. So a lot of what we're going to go through is tied back to those statutory requirements. And if anything changes, it'll either be as a result of changes to the legislation or areas where Michigan Treasury did have some discretion to modify the program terms. So first question, right, is just eligibility as a threshold matter. What types of businesses are eligible? And we tried to break this down into a few different questions that you need to answer, starting with the most basic and then getting down into the more granular. So the threshold matter, the business needs to satisfy all of these criteria listed under number 1 here, right? You have to have a physical presence in Michigan and conduct operations in Michigan. You have to fit within one of the 9 eligible business categories that we will go through in more detail. Importantly, potentially for some of our participants today, if you're tax exempt under the federal tax code, for example, a 501c3 or another 501c type entity, you're probably not eligible fact, you are not eligible under the statute. Not probably, you are not eligible if you're a tax exempt entity under the Internal Revenue Code. So that will exclude a number of potential applicants who would otherwise fit, as we'll see in a minute, within some of these descriptions of otherwise eligible businesses. Likewise, you can't be a governmental entity, so you can't be, we'll see in a moment, like a restaurant that's operated by a government, or a food establishment that's operated by the government. That would be an ineligible applicant under this program. And then you have to be open for business at the time of applying. So you can't be permanently closed. If you're temporarily closed, I guess you need to be open at the time you apply, although this is a little unclear to me for, say, seasonal businesses that only operate in the summer months. I don't know, and I can't see anything in the FAQs presently that addresses that situation where a business that's only open in the summertime, may not be open at the time of its application here in March, but hopefully we'll get some clarity on that type of question as we go along. And then secondly, if your business did not experience a decline in total Michigan sales between calendar year 2019 and 2020 of at least 5%. So if your total Michigan sales, and for this purpose, as we'll see later, we're going to factor in some things like PPP, loan forgiveness, and any restaurant revitalization fund receipts. If you didn't really have any decline in sales from 2019 to 2020 that exceeded 5%, you're not going to be eligible unless you opened between October 1st, 2019 and May 31st, 2020, in which case you may be eligible. It'll be a slightly different approach for those businesses since they don't have, they would only have a few months of 2019 to compare to 2020. So if you're in that group, there'll be differences for you. We're not going to touch on all those differences during this webinar, but you should just be aware that some of these tests and calculations will be a little bit different for those businesses. Okay, so assuming you've met all those criteria, you then have to fall within one of these 9 buckets of eligible businesses or categories of eligible businesses. And we're going to dig a little deeper on a few of these that probably have the most kind of questions or subcategories within the overall general categories. And so things like entertainment venues, we're going to go a little deeper on that because that together with things like recreational facilities and food establishments probably capture a lot of the applicants or a disproportionate share of the applicants relative to the other categories and have probably the most vagueness in the definitions, but I won't read through each of these. You can see it's generally, though, businesses that were not considered sort of essential businesses, at least here in Michigan, where we're located during 2020 when the pandemic first hit. So these are, generally speaking, businesses that were most clearly impacted by the executive orders here in Michigan in 2020 and had to suspend or cease operations for a meaningful period of time. So as I said, entertainment venues, some are obvious, I think, like cinemas, concert halls, performance venues. More generally, though, the definition references businesses that make use of some kind of facility for the purpose of spending time engaged as a spectator to a ticketed event. So this list of examples is not necessarily exhaustive. There could be other types of businesses that fit within this category beyond those that are specifically listed. And when if you decide to apply for a grant under this program, it'll all be online. There's no paper application. When you're online applying, there will be an option to choose entertainment venue other. And as we were brainstorming internally about this, something like a for-profit museum that's not operated by the government might apply under this category. For example, even though it's not specifically listed there, would be a facility, and there could be ticketed events there, like an exhibit or a show of like a planetarium or something like that, as long as it's, again, it can't be a nonprofit or a governmental entity. Similarly, for recreational facilities and public places of amusement, the statute and Treasury reference facilities that are used for some identifiable leisure activity. So, a few of the examples that they give and that are sort of clearly within scope are things like amusement parks. So that, that would suggest that the facility doesn't need to be kind of like an indoor facility. It could be outdoors. Arcades, casinos, bowling alleys, again, water parks, outdoor activity. It could be indoors too, I suppose. Basically all the places that your kids might want you to take them to on the weekend or on any other day, I guess, might fall into this category, again, as long as they are for profit or not, at least not tax exempt under the Internal Revenue Code and not operated by a governmental entity. So, some other examples, again, you'll have the option to apply under other if you're not clearly one of these subcategories. So some things that kind of came to mind, axe throwing, you might have seen some of those types of places pop up. They clearly were not essential businesses during the early days of the pandemic. Bowling, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've done it once. It's like bowling, except you throw a football instead of a bowling ball. So those places are probably eligible as well. It's not specifically called out, but you could still apply as other and kind of explain what your business is. We'll go through one or two more of these, but you'll see the general theme here is for some of these that there needs to be some kind of a facility located in Michigan. For exercise facilities, they reference individual or group physical activity. Again, some of these are obvious: gymnasium, fitness center, exercise studio. But this one, to my mind, you start to bleed into and across categories. I'm not sure it really makes a difference at the end of the day, as long as you're eligible under one of these categories. But arguably, a yoga studio should be considered an exercise facility. Although I suppose you could, if you really enjoy yoga as a recreation as opposed to exercise, maybe it's a recreational facility. But probably better to apply in that case as an exercise facility. So, use your best judgment on those things as you're applying if it's not clear which category you fit into. And the last one I think that we're going to touch on specifically is food establishments. This is a very, very broad category. Obviously, a lot of restaurants were closed or operating on a partial basis early on in the pandemic, either just for takeout or carry out or delivery. This could be a fixed or mobile restaurant, i.e. food truck, or some kind of catering delivery service. One that it just caught my eye just in terms of how broad this is. Industrial feeding establishments. I'm not exactly sure what that is. It might be, maybe that's like at a correctional facility or something, but in any case, this is a broad category for food service. And again, you'll see there's clearly some overlap, like theaters are listed here and food establishments, as are nightclubs, both of which are also listed as recreational facilities. So I guess to the extent that a theater or a nightclub also serves food or drink and is a place of recreation, again, you might be eligible under multiple categories. I don't think it really makes a difference which category you apply under, but probably better to apply under the one that is the primary business in your mind and generates most of the sales. So a few other considerations. If you're an owner of one of these businesses, you don't necessarily need to reside in Michigan. The business, though, needs to have some kind of a presence in Michigan and do business here. If the business has multiple locations, including some outside the state of Michigan, you can still apply, but you'd only apply based on the activities and sales of the Michigan location and the Michigan operations. And I think that may be a little tricky in some cases to define exactly. And I don't see a lot of great answers in the FAQs right now about how to sort of segregate the Michigan operations and sales from the rest of the operations and sales. But if you're an applicant who has some meaningful activity in Michigan, but also significant activity outside of Michigan, one thing to do if you're otherwise eligible is start to think about how to break out that Michigan activity, because you will need to provide financial documentation associated with just those Michigan operations when you apply. And then one other consideration here, some of these businesses need to be licensed in Michigan. So hotels, nursery, so plant nurseries and dealers and growers, body art facilities, so things like tattoos, piercings, athletic trainers, barbers, those all need to be licensed in the state. And so you need to provide evidence of your license when you apply. So if you're not already licensed, but need to be, be a good thing to go ahead and get licensed. The program terms don't reference being licensed at the time you were closed. So I'll be interested to see if they allow some businesses that may not have been properly licensed at the outset of the pandemic to become properly licensed now in order to apply, but that could end up excluding a number of businesses, especially small businesses that, were operating and maybe they didn't even know they had to have a license if they don't allow for some kind of correction or remediation of the licensure. All right, so moving on from that, what does the application process and timeline look like for this program? The most important thing I just want to emphasize, it is not a first come, first serve program, which will slow down some of the, disbursement of the funds, but it will allow for a more organized approach and evaluation of all the awards. So basically, the Treasury Department is going to open up this online application portal tomorrow, March 1st at 8 a.m. It'll remain open through the very last minute of March. At that time, however, it will close and you won't be able to make changes to your application, presumably, unless the state asks some kind of follow-up question or clarification or asks for some additional information. So while you don't need to be sitting, at your computer stroke at midnight or at 8 a.m. exactly like you did for some of the other relief programs, you don't want to wait until the last minute either, because if you miss submission during March, then there's no way to at least under the present rules, no way to go back and get your application in. So probably best, in my opinion, to start the application relatively early, maybe not right away, because we've seen a lot of these types of application portals crash early on, at least the ones that SBA and some other organizations have administered. You might want to focus on gathering your information initially, see how the first couple of days of the application process go, because it seems like many of these programs kind of refine how they collect information and what the process experience is like for users based on those first couple of days. But don't wait too long to at least begin your application. You'll be able to save your progress as you go. And I'd take a look at michigan.gov/ABR. Actually, quite a few good resources. They don't answer all the questions you might have, but there are pretty extensive checklists of the types of information you'll need to submit, financial information, tax information, things like that. So definitely go have a look at michigan.gov/ABR. They also have their own webinars conducted by the third-party partner who I presume Michigan Treasury has contracted with to sort of stand up this portal. I think we talked about most of this already, but if you're familiar with things like the PPP or the Restaurant Revitalization Fund or the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, you'll be familiar with some of these types of requirements, right? So you're going to need to provide pretty thorough supporting documentation and make a variety of certifications to the state when you apply for these funds. And, I would recommend, whether it's Miller Johnson or some other attorney that knows your business well, consult with counsel or your accountant if you have questions about anything here. You've got the time to do it. You have the whole month of March, so you don't need to rush into anything. Again, if you've got sales in multiple states, remember you're going to have to report only the Michigan sales. So you may need to do a little work there in advance to isolate those sales. So that's something to, take on early, so you're not waiting till the last minute to do that, or do it in a way that's acceptable to the state. And then the application processing will include a beneficiary agreement that basically is a contract between your business and the state that includes terms and conditions. And so again, there, whether it's Miller Johnson or somebody else, make sure you understand what you're signing up to, as we'll see in a moment here. And I just took this graphic from the Department of Treasury. If you skip down to the end here at September 30th, 2022, you'll see there will be a public report of all the awards granted under the statute that's required. So, you should know also before you accept any funds or sign any contracts related to this grant program that there will be disclosure of all the participants in the program. So you should assume that going in at some point, it'll become public information that may or may not change your decision about whether to participate, but you should be aware that will come out. And other points, we talked a lot about, March being the application window. So I'm going to skip ahead to the April and May portion here. This is when Treasury will actually review all the applications, and if the program is oversubscribed, so if there are eligible grants for more than $409 million, every grant will be prorated equally. The statute uses the word equally. I don't know if that is going to be, I assume it'll be interpreted to mean an equal percentage basis and not an equal dollar amount, so that each award is scaled down as an equal percentage. But I guess there are a couple of different ways that could be implemented. It would seem more equitable that it would be based on a percentage and not a flat dollar amount, but we'll see. And then in June and July is when we'll actually start to see award notifications, and then no later than July 1st, all payments for these awards will be made via ACH transfer. So you'll need to provide some banking information along with your application. A few other just tips, things we didn't touch on just yet, but they may be obvious to some folks who participated in other programs like this, but you want to make sure you watch your emails, including any spam folders, in case you get follow-up requests from the government or the third-party partner, administering the program for information that, either wasn't quite right or needs to be supplemented, particularly during in April and May while they're in that award review period. If you don't follow up and respond to those requests within 5 days, the Treasury has a default assumption at that point that your application would be considered ineligible. We'll see how rigorously they apply that, but definitely don't want to be in a position of asking to reactivate your application if you don't respond in a timely manner. So make sure you're watching for those follow-up requests at whatever email you provide to the portal. And then lastly, and this is admittedly a bit vague, but there's a restriction under the ARPA about using these funds to compensate anybody twice for the same economic loss. So we'll talk about it a little more during the use of funds section later. But if you have and at the end of the day, all these dollars are fungible, of course, but if you have another grant or award that is addressing a specific need for your business, just make sure you track the dollars that are associated with those other awards to the use that they're permitted for. So for example, if you received another local or state award to buy additional safety gear or airflow system or something like that, you don't want to report that as something that you used these program funds for, unless it is it ends up costing more than the original grant you received. So you just want to make sure for all these programs, you want to keep good documentation about how you use the funds and just make sure it's clear you didn't kind of double dip or there's no perception of double dipping in the different programs. And you'll actually have to make a certification to the state that you're not receiving duplicate benefits because that's a requirement for the state to create this program under the ARPA. So I'm going to turn it over to Wei to talk about the award calculation methodology.
Thank you, Erik, and thanks everybody for participating in this webinar. I wanted to talk about the grant award calculation methodology. I will preface my presentation by saying that on the online application, you will not be required to do this calculation yourself. But I think, knowing about this and can help you to get an estimate of how much money you can get from this grant, from this program, if you are eligible. And I also wanted to set a few parameters on understanding the calculation methodology. So the first one is, really what matters is your 2019 and 2020 Michigan sales. And that would determine whether or not, we will compare your 2020 Michigan sales against the 2019 Michigan sales. We wanted to get a percentage of decline. If the decline is less than 5%, you will not be able to get any of the reward unless your business opened after October 1st, 2019. And the second parameter I wanted to, qualification I want to say is your total award calculation will really be your 2020 financial hardship. Financial hardship is a defined term. So I wanted to point that out because although in the first step we'll talk about revenue decline, your award will not be, the revenue decline will not be part of the formula in calculating the reward. So what I'm saying is you will not get compensated, you will not awarded for your lost revenue, but will be your 2020 financial hardship, which we will talk about in the following slides. So with that, I wanted to dive into the methodology. So you really fall into one of the two groups. If your business is in operation before October 1st, 2019, you are in one group. If your business is opened after October 1st, 2019, but before June 1st, 2020, you go to another group. If your business opened after June 1st, 2020, you will not be eligible for the grant. So let's talk about the first group. If your business is in operation before October 1st, 2019. In this case, we basically have a 4-step process. The first step the application process will require you to compare your 2019 Michigan sales against the 2020 Michigan sales, and as Erik talked about, some of the PPP forgiveness loans and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grants will be part of the calculation, and they have software to sort of determine how much if it's dollar for dollar against your 2020 sales, all that. And then and that percentage, your decline percentage, will be the first step. The second step is calculating the cap on applicant's financial hardship. So this is for calendar year 2020, and most of this award cap for most of the applicants will really be the property tax that you have paid in 2020. And then and the third step in this in the first category is so the Treasury has given us a table. So if you we'll look at the table in the next slide. And the final step is as Erik talked about, is the proration if the program is oversubscribed. This step will be skipped if the program is not oversubscribed. For business beginning operation after October 1st, 2019, but before June 1st, 2020, the first step is skipped. So you will not compare the 2019 and 2020 Michigan sales decline in Michigan sales. Instead, you will certify that you are either fully or partially closed due to an executive order by the Michigan State, by the state of Michigan, or by the CDC, or by Michigan Department of Human Health. If you have any question about how this is, if you do not have proof about this, you can either ask your attorney about how to prove this, or how to upload documents about for this kind of certification. And then the second step is similar to the first category. You will calculate your 2020 award cap. And the third step is if the program is oversubscribed, it will be prorated. If it's not oversubscribed, we'll skip the third step. So as I said, business beginning operation after June 1st, 2020 will not be eligible for the program. And and business, as Erik talked about, business not in operation on the application day will also not be eligible for the program. And again, applicants only are only required to provide information on the online application system. You are not required to input a number of the grant you are seeking. The program will automatically do that for you. So I just wanted to very quickly walk you through step by step. In detail about step. So for step one, this is for business that is in operation before October 1st, 2019. You will upload documents about your 2019 Michigan sales and 2020 Michigan sales, and then you will identify any offsets of the COVID-19 relief fund you received. This includes the PPP fund that are forgiven, the restaurant revitalization fund you received, or other COVID-19 related state or federal aid that you received. Some of this examples, like ERTC and EIDL, you will still need to provide documents to the application, but the software, they have software to determine which one will be an offset to your 2020 Michigan sales.
Wait, sorry to interrupt. Just real quickly on that point, because I think a lot of clients will have received tax credits, the employee retention tax credits in particular. There appears to be an there's an FAQ that appears to just exclude those employee retention tax credits from being considered offsetting COVID relief altogether. So again, consult your counsel and accountants as you're reporting this information, but I just wanted to double highlight that particular exclusion because it can be a pretty significant one for many clients. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, thank you, Erik. And then you subtract your calendar year 2020 Michigan sales against 2020 Michigan sales. I have an example after this, which I think will sort of make it easier to understand. And then finally, you verify the percentage decline, which is what really we care about. The percentage decline in total Michigan sales in 2020 against 2019 is at least 5%. So this slide talks about financial hardship. This is really what the cap amount you can get under this program. So financial hardship is determined by basically 5 factors in calendar year 2020. I think for most applicants, the most significant one is the Michigan property tax paid, or if you lease property, we're talking about real property, personal property are not eligible. Personal property taxes or lease costs are not eligible under this program. So if you pay property tax, it's in 2020, it's the 2020 property tax. Or if you're under a lease, it's 17% of the lease cost paid by the business owner. And the second factor is 50% of the Michigan unemployment insurance tax. Third one is on-premise retail liquor license fees, and then plus license required inspection fees paid under Michigan food inspection law, and then the final category catches all business license or inspection fees. So this is financial hardship. This caps what you may receive from this program. And there is a catch. The award is may not exceed $5 million for an applicant. So when we have the percentage of decline, we will come. This is the table I talked about earlier. when we have the percentage decline, we will compare the percentage on the left hand of this table. So if you have, for example, if you have 25% decline in 2020, you will get 100% of the financial hardship. If you have 8% decline in 2020, you will get 25% of the financial hardship. Again, to repeat, if the program is oversubscribed, that means if all the eligible applications, when they close the window on March 31st, and they do a calculation, if all the applications is more than $409 million, and they will prorate it equally. As Erik said, it's probably a proration. And again, this program is not administered as a first time, first served basis. So yeah, this program will mitigate some of the lottery issues that some people may have issued in the PPP programs. So imagine this is a food establishment business, and this business has operation before October 1st, 2019. So we'll look at the first row. We'll look at the 2019 Michigan sales. We had for this business we have $100,000, and for 2020 Michigan sales it declined to $50,000, and the business received some sort of COVID-19 related relief payments for $1,000. So the adjusted 2020 Michigan sales will be the actual sales plus the COVID-19 relief fund. So it will be $51,000, and the decline will be compared against 2019, which in this case will be $49,000, and the percentage in decline in this case is 49%. And then the next step is we calculate the cap on the reward. In this case, suppose we have the business owner has paid $8,000 property tax and paid $1,000 unemployment insurance tax, and liquor license fees in 2020 was $500, and other inspection fees was $500. So the award cap in this case is $10,000. And then we compare the percentage decline we got from step one against the table on the left side. So that's more than 20%. And in this case, we'll get 100% of the financial hardship. And the state, after all the application be received, will determine whether or not proration will be needed. If not, the reward in this case will be $10,000. Well, I think I'll stop talking and I'll give it back to Erik.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Wei. And you can imagine every one of these situations is going to be a little different. And just to repeat something Wei said is, all you're going to do when you apply is submit the information, and then the portal will make all the calculations sort of behind the scenes. And then obviously that last step, the proration, will happen after the fact, once all applications have been reviewed. So that's why it's going to take a little bit longer to get the funds out. As we mentioned, if you started your business between October 1st and May 31st, October 1st, 2019 and May 31st, 2020, there will be a slightly different methodology, which Wei summarized, but the kind of threshold eligibility for types of businesses and things like that are essentially the same. One question that I'm not entirely satisfied with, I know what the answer is or how to approach it with the application, is for a business that has multiple entities involved in their operations in Michigan. The My Treasury FAQs and websites say that each entity with its own federal tax ID or EIN must submit its own application. rather than, say, having a parent company with an EIN submit an application, that seems overly cumbersome to have it be each entity applying for its own grant and making sure you're not applying using the same total sales in Michigan and the same costs duplicatively. So in any case, I would just make sure you're not kind of reporting the same sales and the same cost to determine your financial hardship twice if you're using multiple entities, as it appears you may be required to do if you have multiple companies with different EINs operating in Michigan. And well, we already talked about the $5 million per award cap. There's not the state treasury has not addressed kind of the affiliate type issues that we saw in the PPP context, where there was a per award cap plus there was another cap on the maximum amount that an affiliated group could receive. I think we can probably expect to see some more FAQs and maybe rulemaking on that front, but I don't have a good answer for that presently. And then lastly, for now at least, award funds will be reportable for both state and federal tax purposes. There's nothing in state or federal tax code currently that would exclude these amounts. For example, like the PPP loan forgiveness was excluded, at least for federal tax purposes. Use of funds, to go fairly quickly so we leave a little time for Q&A. Basically, as I said before, you don't want to use these funds for anything that you received another grant and spent another grant on. You don't obviously want to use these funds for personal costs or payments. That could get a little bit blurry, say, for businesses that operate as an independent contractor or sole proprietorship, where you have a personal vehicle that you also use for the business, or some other expenses that you need to allocate some portion of to your business. Just be very mindful of that. If you can use the funds for other costs that don't have any personal benefit to you, in particularly if you can use them for future license fees or factors like rent payments or property taxes that were included in your financial hardship, that's probably the better way to go if you can. But in general, the permitted uses of these funds is a lot less prescriptive than, for example, the Paycheck Protection Program, where there were very limited, or not very limited, but there were limited categories of forgivable uses, and you had to spend a certain portion on payroll costs. Those concepts are not applicable here. The main concepts are just non-duplication and don't use it for personal costs. So just to wrap up here before having a few minutes for Q&A, at least sitting here today, we'll see what else Treasury puts out as this program evolves during March. I'm sure they'll get a lot of questions and make more clarifications as we go. And if there are any that are really important, we'll keep track of them at Miller Johnson and update accordingly. But I think, many larger businesses may decide not to apply, even if they are technically eligible, especially if their award amount is relatively small. If they do that back of the envelope calculation that Wei was talking about, to get a sense of their potential award, and they may just decide it's not worth it, right? The public disclosure of participating, and the sense that people will see that they participated. Larger companies may just want to move on from all these kind of COVID era programs They may not want to disclose some of their financial information if they don't have to Treasury. And with the various certifications that need to be made, they may just decide it's not worthwhile for a comparatively small amount. And here I'm talking about genuinely larger businesses, right? Because one thing we didn't call out specifically, but it's not a requirement that you saw anywhere, is like in the SBA or the PPP context, there were size limitations, right, for number of employees or revenue. There's nothing like that in this program. So, in theory, you could have some very large companies eligible to participate in some way. And so they'll have to make a decision about whether they want to do that. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got really small businesses, say just, mom and pop genuinely, or even just a one person business like an athletic trainer. They may not have all the financial information that they need to apply. In some cases, they may not have had the right licenses. So we'll see how stringently Treasury applies those criteria. If they haven't filed their 2020 taxes yet, that could be another impediment. So there's a number of things that could create impediments to really small businesses applying. I think if you're eligible and you're a very small business, probably worth doing still. But if you have to create a whole new set of financial information that you didn't already have, then obviously, you may determine that the amount of the award is not worth the time that you need to invest to do that. And then that kind of leaves the middle-sized, medium businesses. I think those are going to be the ones who are kind of best suited for this program, especially if they were in one of those industries that, people really recognized, like, was impacted by those COVID closures in Michigan. So restaurants and gyms, and not to exclude any of the other types of businesses that are eligible. They were all impacted by COVID in one way or another. But it'll be the ones that have these relatively high fixed costs, whether it's real estate or licensing. And in particular, if they were unable for some reason to participate in the other stimulus programs like the PPP or the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, they're going to be sort of the best situated to make the certifications, to have the financial information already available, to have already been licensed properly, but nevertheless have to have, they had to close due to COVID. And so they will have a relatively high award and a good justification for making the various certifications to the state to get the award. So that is the conclusion of what we wanted to cover today. As I said, this is an evolving program. So I would keep an eye again on that michigan.gov/ABR site if you're thinking about applying. There will be new FAQs from time to time. You can call me or Wei if you have questions on the legal side. Make sure you talk to your accountants if you have questions on the financial side. If you need to create some new financial information to report out, that'll be an important website to keep track of. So I'm gonna turn it over, Wei, if you want to see if there are any questions in the Q&A that you think would be good to address with the whole group. Let me know.
Well, I would just say there's a question about what specific documents will be required to submit in terms of the financial. I have a list here. So your 2020 property, evidence of 2020 property tax paid, 2020 lease, if you have that, if that's applicable, and 2020 state unemployment insurance paid, if that's applicable, calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020 audited financial statements, if that's applicable, if you have those. If you don't, they're not required. 2019, 2000 federal and state tax, Michigan returns, and the other financial information is related to stimulus funds that you received in 2020.
And
yep.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, there are checklists of information that that you can access at that michigan.gov/ABR site. They have, again, their own webinars that don't include any kind of as much commentary as we included in our webinar today, but are very helpful in terms of just understanding the mechanics of what you need to provide and, how Treasury is implementing the program.
Yep.
Any other questions, Wei? I'm having a hard time seeing the Q&A box, but we do have a couple minutes left here. If there are any that we can.
Yeah, there's another question. It says, I have a client who opened her restaurant on September 28, 2019. Is there any way to allow her to be eligible? So that's September 28.
Yeah.
So that's right.
Yeah, we talked about that one. Wei, you actually behind the scenes, Wei and I were as we were finalizing the slides, Wei asked a very similar question, and to make sure we were reading the program rules the same way. And unfortunately, I think in that situation, the restaurant, if they open before October 1st, right, and this is where you think about Treasury having fairly limited discretion potentially because of the statute. I have to go back and look to see if this is one of the statutory requirements or if this is something where Treasury has flexibility. But if they open before October 1st, 2019, then even though they only had a relatively short 2019 period of sales, they will probably, at least where we sit right now, probably have to use the general framework for determining the decline in total Michigan sales. But I would keep an eye on that one as we go forward. And, you've got a month left before the application deadline. And so we'll see if there's any flexibility on that point. But I think they're probably going to have to compare that short 2019 period to all of 2020, which in some cases is going to be a bad result, obviously, for businesses like that one.
Yeah, thank you, Erik. We have a few other questions. Do we have time to cover those, or should we respond them?
Yeah, why don't we do one more? If there's one more that's a kind of generally applicable one, and then we can follow up.
Okay. So there's a question about the PPP received in 2020 but was forgiven in 2021. Is that still?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. No, sorry to cut you off, Wei. That is addressed. I don't know if it's addressed in the written FAQs on the program website, but it was addressed in one of the webinars that they hosted. That was a question that was submitted, and the answer was yes. Even if the forgiveness, or even if the loan itself was first made under the PPP in 2021 and forgiven in 2021 or 22, that you would still need to include that adjustment in your 2020 as an adjustment to your 2020 sales. Again, this will all happen. All the calculations will be made on the website, on the portal for the application. So just, report the information accurately and it'll get factored in. But I do believe that they are including amounts from 2021 and 2022 in that adjustment to 2020 sales. I don't know what they're going to do for those applicants who received the PPP loan and either have not received the final forgiveness determination yet, or who have not yet filed for forgiveness, because the adjustment for 2020 sales is only forgiven PPP loans. So you could imagine a situation where a business is likely to receive forgiveness ultimately, but just hasn't filed yet, or hasn't received the determination back yet. They won't know potentially in March how much of their PPP loan was forgiven. So I think that's another area where we're likely to see questions asked of Treasury and hopefully published out for people who are in sort of those unique situations. So sorry we didn't have time to get to all the questions. Wei and I will take a look at the ones we didn't answer during the webinar. You can feel free to reach out to either of us again. Here are our pictures and phone numbers. Feel free to reach out to either of us. And thank you again so much for joining us this morning and starting your week with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.